Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Decades with Joe E. Kramer.
It's 9 o'clock.
Hey everybody, this is Ivan from Men Without Hats. Hi everyone, this is Russell Hitchcock of Air Supply.
I'm all out of love. I'm so lost without you. I know you were right, believing for so long.
Hey everybody, it's Robert Mason from War.
Heaven isn't too far away. Closer till it ever began.
And you're listening to Decades. You're listening to Decades. Let's all hang out with Joey Kramer on Decades.
This is the Decades Artist Spotlight. Now, here's Joe E. Kramer with this week's artist.
We are on a Decades Artist Spotlight, and tonight, the Doobie Brothers, Mr. Tom Johnston, who is the lead singer of the Doobie Brothers, now and forever, right? We'll be talking to him in just a few minutes, and of course, all the great music from the Doobie Brothers, including this one. 1988, it was their big hit in the 80s from their album Cycles. Tom Johnston from the Doobie Brothers. We'll talk to him next right here, the Decades Artist Spotlight.
is the Decades Artist Spotlight with Joe E. Kramer. This week's artist
It is another Decades Artist Spotlight, and tonight it is a true honor to have singer-songwriter, guitarist, and founding member of one of the greatest rock and roll bands of all time, from the Doobie Brothers, Mr. Tom Johnston. How you doing, Tom?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
So, Tom, it's 50 years, just about, with the Doobie Brothers, or, since the Doobie Brothers got back together. Does it seem that long?
No. Actually, it doesn't.
And when you started, did you think 50 years later this thing would still be trucking along?
I don't think anybody in any band could ever look at you square in the eye and say, we knew this was going to happen. If they did, I don't believe them.
That's what everybody seems to say. Now, I want to talk, we get some big shows coming up in November, and I want to talk about that. You're always touring. Doobie Brothers are on tour continuously. You just were on tour with Steely Dan. But before we talk about that, 5 minutes or less, hey, just give us a brief history of how the Doobie Brothers came to be back in the early 70s.
Okay, I was living on 12th Street in San Jose with student ghetto over by San Jose State. I was going to college. John Hartman had moved out from the East Coast along with Greg Murphy, who was a bass player.
Right.
And I was hanging around with Skip Spence a lot, and we had a band, which Skip wasn't part of, called Pud, and it evolved all the time. And I'd already played in a lot of bands around the San Jose area when I'd gotten up there. But we played one night with Skip in a place called the Gaslight Theater in Campbell. And Pat was playing that night with a friend of his, Peter Grant, I believe, on banjo. And we were playing in this throw-together rock and roll group with Skip. It was Skip, myself, John, and I think it was, I don't remember if it was Dave Sjogren who ended up being our bass player on the first album, or it was Greg Murphy. It was one or the other. And so we were playing, and we watched Pat's set as well. We were kind of blown away to finger picking and how, he's really a phenomenal finger picker, as, Peter Grant was a real good player too, and a good singer. And we asked him to come over and jam at the 12th Street House, which was kind of a jam central for San Jose anyway,
right,
for a lot of people. And he did, and long story short, we asked him if he, would be interested in starting a band. And we'd all been Moby Grape fans, so we kind of went in that direction for a while, and then we just basically started the band, started writing songs, started playing every club we could find, pretty much like any other band, and except that we really concentrated on writing rather than doing covers. And that was the beginning of the band.
And unbelievable. That short story evolved into, 50 years of the Doobie Brothers. It's great.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like you asked that question, nobody ever knows what's going to happen. It's just a complete experiment all the time, especially at the initial part of the band.
Absolutely. Here we are, nearly 50 years later, and a big announcement just came down a little while ago about 2 nights at the Beacon Theater in New York City. You haven't been there in, 25 years?
95. We've only played there once, and it was in 95. Yeah, so it's been a while.
So how does it feel to go back to the Beacon now?
I'm looking forward to it. I've been asking to play at the Beacon for a while, and fortunately that's going to happen. And when I was asking, I hadn't even thought about doing album nights.
Right.
Furthest thing from my mind. We've never done that, ever. And I was on a conference call with Kareem Karmi, who represents us at Azov, and guys from CAA, and in specifics, Mitch Rose is the one that came up with doing those 2 albums. And I said, sure. I've never done it before, but I said we could give that a shot. And then it turns out a lot of people have done that. And to me, just playing at the Beacon is kind of like one of those places that you just want to play, because a lot of people that, you came up listening to, be it the Allman Brothers and Steely Dan, who we used to tour with a lot, has played there a lot. I think Billy Joel's played there. If there's anybody that hadn't played there, actually it'd be easier to say that than name off everybody that has.
Right.
But certain people have just kind of owned that place. They go and play for a week in a row. Like Allman Brothers did that, and I believe Steely Dan's done that. Those are the two that I can think of at the moment. And I'm sure there's a lot more, and I don't mean to disrespect anybody. It's just that I'm not aware of who it is.
And how did you come about? I mean, two of the greatest albums you guys made, and I was introduced to the Doobie Brothers at a very young age. My parents had 8 tracks, of course, and Toulouse Street was one of the albums you're going to be playing in its entirety. And the actual title track of that album was the first song I think I ever heard by the Doobies, because, and I called it, my parents always called you the Doobies. I mean, that's how I grew up knowing. I don't even think I knew there was Doobie Brothers until a while later, because they always referred to as, here's the Doobies. That's all they would say in my house. And that was the first 8-track I heard, and I was very young, and all those songs on that album, it reminds me of my childhood, my very young childhood, because I remember these songs being played in my house continuously, and it was a fantastic album. I later got it on vinyl, and then eventually on CD, and it's just one of those albums that start to finish. Not many bands could play a whole album from start to finish, and every song being really good.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you enjoyed it and still enjoy it. It's a challenge in that you're playing the album the way it is on the album. In other words, you're not taking the songs out of sequence,
right,
out of album. And if you're playing live normally, you don't ever play it that way.
I know.
Because there's a reason for playing it the way we do, songs from both those albums, for that matter, which we still play live all the time. And the idea is to build the show. But on an album, you're not trying to accomplish it. On an album, you're trying to accomplish keeping people interested while they're sitting at their house or dancing or whatever the heck they want to do. But whatever that is, it's not built the same way as a show, as a live gig. And so the challenge is to do that, and you really just should go out and play. This is something entirely new for us. So we've been working on it. Like the whole time we were out with Steely Dan, we were working on the songs that we didn't play live, and a couple we've never ever played live ever.
And it just
it was a real eye opener to dig into these songs and find out what was going on and what you played, and try to remember. Oh my God, that's a long time ago, and you're just thinking, wow. And then you sit there and start playing it, and slowly but surely it starts to coalesce, and it's pretty interesting. But it is a real challenge. Other stuff, we play it all the time, so it's not that big a deal. But playing them in that sequence is probably the biggest change of all.
And I mean, the song has some hit power too on it. I mean, for the casual listener of the Doobie Brothers, you have listened to the music on there. You have Jesus Is Just All Right on there, which is, I think everybody knows that song. I know my young daughters knew it at a young age. They'd say, "Dad, we heard that song you were listening to. We went to Bible school and we heard Jesus Is Just All Right." And I thought that was funny. I'm like, oh, they're playing the Doobie Brothers in Bible school.
Sacrilege. Oh, well.
He got the point across. But and that was the first album you worked with Ted Templeman on, correct?
Yes, it was.
And for those that don't know, big time. I mean, he's done Van Halen, and of course he's done the Doobie Brothers. He's done Van Morrison. He's done Carly Simon, Joan Jett. But he's worked on a lot of your albums.
He worked on every album we did up until even after I left the band,
right.
He was still doing the band up until, I guess, 82, and then he was on World Gone Crazy as well.
So I want you to briefly, before we move on to the second album, talk a little bit about the title track. This is a song that I really like, although if I tell people, I mentioned this song, they might not know it as one of the, if they're not a big Doobie Brother fan, but Toulouse Street, I love that song. It's almost got like a folkish sound to it.
The song Toulouse Street specifically?
Right, the song specifically is Toulouse Street.
That was written by Pat, and it's basically about being in New Orleans, which is, for whatever reason, we ended up in New Orleans a lot, and we still go down there every year. And Pat loves that town, and we all do. But he really was taken with the vibe and hanging around the quarter, and not for the reasons most people think, not for the party and all that, just because it's such an old place, and it's been around since, 1700s, I guess,
right.
When the French first put it together. And we all dig it for that reason. It's got such a history, and Toulouse Street is a real street, and so he incorporated that into a story that he made up in his head about, I guess, I don't know if these things were fictitious or if they really happened. You'd have to talk to Pat about that, but that's where that comes from, and it's a finger-picking song, which to me is what, Pat's forte is. He's really good at it. And it's kind of a song that, talks about something you've been going through and experiencing, and it references New Orleans things like Creole girls and shuttered windows and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of it's not eerie at all. That's the wrong word. It's just kind of, it's almost like a dream song.
It's relaxing. You put it on your headphones and you listen to that song. It's very it's very mellow.
Yeah, it's very much laid back. Yeah.
Absolutely.
This week's Decades Artist Spotlight continues. Now, here's Joe E. Kramer with this week's artist.
We are on a Decades Artist Spotlight. Tom Johnston, the frontman of the Doobie Brothers, is with us tonight. Not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I try to understand. I really do. So many bands that are in there, you go, huh? And then you have the Doobie Brothers who are on the outside looking in. But anyway, we have our second part of our conversation with Tom coming up next, and more music from the Doobie Brothers right here. It is Decades Around the World, therivernepa.com, also Decades with joeekramer.com. Check it out. RadioBold.com, Radio Bold app. Get it for your iPhone or Android device, and of course live right here every Saturday night on the River, 105 and 103.5. More with Tom Johnston of the Doobie Brothers next.
This is the Decades Artist Spotlight.
Northeast PA's The River. is just alright with me. Jesus is just alright, oh yeah. Jesus is just alright with me. Jesus is just alright, oh yeah.
Decades Artist Spotlight.
This week's Decades Artist Spotlight continues. Now, here's Joe E. Kramer with this week's artist.
We are on a Decades Artist Spotlight. Tom Johnston. He is the frontman and one of the co-founders of the Doobie Brothers. We've been talking to him. Let's get back to Tom Johnston from the Doobie Brothers on the Decades Artist Spotlight. And I said about Jesus is just all right, just to go back and say that it was a gospel song originally. I mean, that's what it was.
It was. It was written by a Reverend. I thought it was A.C. Reynolds, but apparently that's not the correct name.
Who did Art Reynolds, I think? Art Reynolds Singers did it originally?
Something like that,
yes,
yeah. And I finally heard the original cut. I was kind of blown away. It took me, 40-something years to hear the original. We took it from the Byrds.
Yeah, the Byrds did it back in like '69 or something like that, and it was funny because when you hit, there was a lot of songs like that out because Norman Greenbaum had "Spirit in the Sky," that song from what is it called? Jesus Christ Superstar. I think Murray Head or whoever did Superstar, and then of course Jesus is just all right, and it's become one of your signature songs.
Yeah, people love it. They still do.
Absolutely.
It's a popular song with the crowd. They enjoy it.
And they're playing it. They're playing it in Bible schools all over.
Dancing and clapping and what have you.
And they're playing it in Bible schools all over the country.
That's amazing.
All right.
It's a funny thing about that song. When we first put that out, and when we were playing, back in the day, we were playing all these large venues, small venues, everywhere in between. But when we were first starting to really hit, if you will. Oh God. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
We got a lot of people throwing Bible scriptures on the stage and pointing one way, and we weren't all that religious, so we're looking at them and kind of snickering, but at the same time going, well, if they like it, they like it. Who cares? That's all that matters. It's a good song, makes you feel good. That's what songs are supposed to do.
Absolutely. Now I want to move here because I want to get to the second the album, The Captain in Me. That's the other album you'll be doing at the Beacon Theater. Talk a little bit about that album.
It was the next album after Toulouse Street. We never did concept albums, so whatever we wrote is what the album was like.
Right.
People probably associate the album cover as much as just like they did with Toulouse Street.
With the wagon, the
Yeah,
Yeah.
that wasn't even our idea. That was something that the Warner Brothers people came up with. It was a really neat idea. I thought it was cool. And then out there where the earthquake had taken down the highway and that sort of thing. It was fun to do that photo shoot. It was interesting. But as far as the tunes on it, once again, it's just we would, by that time we were on the road all the time. We were doing something like 200 gigs a year. And if we weren't on the road, then we were in the studio. And we did an album every year like clockwork. And so the songs on that were whatever we came up with, just like it was on the songs after that, the albums after that. And that one had a little more experimentation, which is another thing that grew as the albums went along. You know, we tried using some studio cats on things, or we used Ry Cooder on things, or we used Guthrie on things, or we, you know, it's just parts. It's not like they wrote songs or anything. It's just they played on them and really added a nice touch. It was really cool. And these are the kind of people you saw in the studio all the time while we were down there. So it was kind of cool. You're working with your compatriots, if you will. But The Captain and Me was actually fairly different from Toulouse Street. I mean, we still had the elements that made the band, which is finger picking and chunka and the elements of, I guess you call it Americana, and mixed with rhythm and blues,
right,
and rock and roll, of course. And that's basically what the band's all about anyway. And things like Long Train Running,
China Grove,
yeah. I'm trying to think of
Dark-Eyed Cajun Woman.
Dark-Eyed Cajun Woman. I was just trying to think of songs that everybody's going to know. Dark-Eyed Cajun Woman is a favorite with me because
Yeah,
I'm a
I like
blues
that
man.
song.
And it's the first one I actually wrote that was a blues song. We had covered one on Toulouse Street, but it was a cover. It was a Sonny Boy Williamson tune. But that song I actually wrote, and I was really happy with the way that song came out. I thought it was pretty cool. The tip of the hat to B.B. King.
Well, you can't
China
miss what
Grove was, you know, it was a big charting song, as was Long Train Running. And there's a lot of songs on that album that are really pretty cool, experimental. Evil Woman being one of them, kind of like went someplace that we'd never gone before. Some of the instrumentation, stuff like on Natural Thing, using synthesizers to play horn parts and stuff,
right,
which we'd never done any of that kind of stuff before. And, you know, with each album you kind of grow and you try new things and get different players on it, and it's fun. It's all part of the growing thing.
Who would have thought Long Train Running, just to briefly talk about that, what we're talking 20 years later, it became a dance hit. I remember like in 93, I was DJing in clubs, and I remember getting the import from the United Kingdom for the remix of Long Train Running. It became a song that was actually getting played in the clubs.
Yeah, I got to hear that a few times. That was very popular. They were doing that with a lot of songs.
Yeah, they were.
It's a funny thing because I never thought that song really was any big deal. We'd actually been playing that since like 1970 or 71 in one form or another. It was just a jam.
Yeah.
That was it. And the only thing that held it together, if you will, was Without Love, the chorus. Other than that, I made up the words every night until we finally recorded it. And I was really surprised at how well it did. I was kind of shocked. Not that I didn't like it. I thought it was cool. I always did like playing it, but I just didn't think it was like necessarily a big deal for an album. But Teddy taught me into it, and thank God he did.
Well, the Doobie Brothers are going to be at the Beacon Theater in New York, November 15th, 16th, Toulouse Street. The Captain and Me, of course, they're going to be doing a couple other songs from what I hear. What about, just to kind of wind things down here, what about new music? Because I hear, you know, there's talks of a new album possibly.
Yeah, I'm going to be in L.A. writing all next week. And I was writing yesterday here at the house in my studio as well. Yes, we are going to put out probably an EP. I don't know if we're going to do an album. People don't buy albums anymore.
I know.
Things have really changed. Unless, you know, you're some megastar or something like that. You're not going to sell albums. And I think streaming's had a lot to do with that.
Absolutely.
And it's just the way it is now. So that's fine. So we'll probably put out, I don't know, 4 or 5 songs, pick the best ones out of all the stuff we got, and find one and put it out and see what happens in today's golden age of music, which is way different from what it used to be.
Yeah. You're saying about album. The only person I think that sells millions anymore is somebody like Taylor Swift. She puts out a CD and she sells, 2 billion physical copies. Everybody else, you used to, if they sold 500,000, that was okay. Now you sell 100,000, and that's considered, a big success.
Yeah, you're right. It is.
It's a lot different.
It is very different. The whole paradigm of how music is marketed these days is different, completely different.
We're here on the Decades Artist Spotlight. We have Tom Johnston, the lead singer, of course, of the Doobie Brothers, legendary band. I mean, I've been listening to them all my life. They're going to be doing 2 dates at the Beacon Theater, doing Toulouse Street and The Captain and Me, and that's going to be happening on November 15th and November 16th. I'm hoping maybe there's going to be some type of recording of these events. Have they thought of that maybe?
It's been bandied around. Nobody has done anything concrete at this point that I know of, but that doesn't mean it won't happen. A lot of people are requesting not only that it's recorded, but also that they do a DVD of it. And it could happen. I'm not saying nobody has talked about it yet.
Right.
So who knows?
Well, I hope so, because I know I would love to hear it. I'd love to see it, of course. Decades Artist Spotlight, Tom Johnston from the Doobie Brothers. Tom, it's been fantastic having you on the show tonight. I do appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure. Hi, this is Tom Johnston of the Doobie Brothers, and you're listening to Decades with Joey Kramer.
Down around the corner, half a mile from here, see them always run, and you watch them disappear. Without love, where would you be now? Without love.
From the Doobie Brothers with us. If you missed any part of this interview, we'll have it at decadeswithjoeykramer.com. Let's do one more from the Doobies.
This is the Decades Artist Spotlight.
Northeast PA's The River. Don't you feel it growing day by day?
This week's Decades Artist Spotlight continues. Now, here's Joe E. Kramer with this week's artist.
We are on the Decades Artist Spotlight, and of course, Tom Johnston of the Doobie Brothers was in the spotlight tonight. If you missed it, it'll be online, decadeswithjoekramer.com. You can check that out and all the other interviews. Well, a lot of my interviews are up on the page now. I'm trying to get more and more up there every single week. Next Saturday night, Shadow Steel will be joining us, and a very special guest during the 9 o'clock hour, or 10 o'clock hour, I'm sorry. Surprise, surprise, surprise. All that and more, so make sure you listen each and every Saturday night. It's Decades around the world at theriverindpa.com. Decades with joekramer.com, the Radio Bold app for your Android or your Apple device. And, of course, right here and only right here on the River 105 and 103.5.